Hi, Freddie. Good to see you again.
Hi, how are you? How's
Good, thank you.
been?
And this is our first video podcast.
It is our first video, so that's pretty exciting. We'll be getting it out on social, so you won't be able to avoid us, even if you try. So today we're going to talk a bit about the US, as usual, a bit about the ceasefire, and a bit about change the date and the topic that it's become in Australia. So what are we going to start off with?
Let's start off with the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. And that's been an interesting development, obviously a very thankful development for some of the hostages and their families who've been released, and a ceasing in hostilities mainly. So that's been a really good change. But
it's important to talk about that at the beginning of the ceasefire, obviously there was a lot of confusion around when the ceasefire was starting. People started celebrating in Gaza, believing that they were free from this conflict that's been going on, and yet there were still people dying around them. I heard this really horrifying story that's important to mention this stuff as we're nearing the end of it, because I think a lot of people will be ready to move on from what's happened and pretend like it never happened and think about other things. But this guy, he went over to tell his brother that the war was ended and that it was time for them to celebrate. And by the time he got to his brother's house, his brother had died in another missile attack. So really horrific stories like
Terrible.
that, talking about how people like who die on the last day of the war and the last reaches of a war are always the ones that you feel for the most, which is quite hardening. So
quite tragic, really.
Quite tragic.
And so the whole negotiation, it's interesting because the Biden administration has been working on this for months and months, and of course Trump is now was almost the president. He said he wants it done by, his inauguration. So clearly, together those two forces and the force on Netanyahu, I heard that the negotiator from Trump, who's also Jewish, Netanyahu, said he didn't want to work on the Sabbath, and the negotiator from Trump's team said, "Hey, I'm Jewish. We're working on the Sabbath to get this done." So it was an interesting interlude.
Interesting. I mean, I think it's less about them being intimidated by Trump and his strategic prowess. I think it's more about them being intimidated by his lack of predictability.
That's true.
The fact that he could do anything at a moment's notice. So that's where I come from on that particular issue. But sure, you can also laud some of his staff and say that.
Well, the question is, I don't think it would have happened if Trump had not got into power, and his unpredictability. What is the cause of it? Who knows? But that combination of this months of negotiation and a specific deadline might have had an impact.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, but I guess that also shows a complete failure of the International Criminal Court and our international system as a whole. If the only reason why a ceasefire has occurred is because an autocratic leader has become in charge of the biggest, most powerful country in the world, that's the only reason why that could happen, not through our normal means of
Let's not get onto our normal means of doing things. Those international institutions are under huge threat at the moment, so we'll talk a little bit about that later.
Yeah, we will. And so talking about that and talking about how Trump had a massive impact on the ceasefire and its formation, we also have to talk about Biden's last days, right? And how that affected the American people in general. So obviously the most famous of the things he did was pardon his son.
And he also did preemptive pardons. And, the very last minute, I think when Trump was speaking, just before he became president, Biden also did preemptive pardons for people like Dr. Anthony Fauci, who you might remember was instrumental in the fight against COVID in the US, and I think did incredible work. But I was reading the other day, he's got 4 armed guards at any time, him and his family, because so many crazies want to kill him, anti-vaxxers, etc. So I didn't know that. And so these preemptive pardons for him, Liz Cheney, and a few others that Biden anticipated would come under the focus of legal action from Trump, was, a lot of people question it, but I think what he was trying to do was protect those people from huge legal costs defending themselves. Now, one or two of them who were given preemptive pardons rejected it and didn't accept it because they said that sort of assumes some level of guilt on their part, and they're certainly not guilty.
So it sets a legal precedent for them not being guilty of anything. That's interesting. I mean, I know that Anthony Fauci was he's nicknamed the COVID Tsar in America, so he really has a lot of, either people love him or they hate him. Yep. It feels like, and there's a few more people who hate him than love him, I think.
But how must Biden have felt after 40 years in politics? You know, that's the way he's finishing as president and in politics.
And that's the way he's going to be remembered.
Getting on that helicopter and flying out. You've got to feel for people when they've had this incredible level of power and then fly off into the sunset.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that he even got the chance to be president when you think about it.
That's true.
At the point when he campaigned, he was already really like aging out of the age you should be to become president. Although obviously Donald Trump has now, changed the game with that because he's our oldest elected president in America as of right now. So, he was really an interim president to begin with. I think a lot of people say so. Maybe he should be happy. But the fact as well, he had to think about his family, and preemptively pardoning the members of his family was also quite interesting. The fact that he thinks Trump would stoop so low as to target his family members is quite horrifying, really.
Well, I did see Trump interviewed yesterday when he was saying, he's dealt with 4 years of hell defending himself. It's only right that Biden and his cohort should go through the same thing, quote unquote.
Yeah, exactly. Because a convicted felon, and this is a completely different thing, of course.
So it's been an exciting time in Washington, no doubt. The inauguration, which happened indoors because of the cold temperature, is the story.
And the reason why the cold temperature, I think, is incredibly ironic, considering Trump made this whole big deal, it's freezing, what even is climate change? When the freezing temperatures are a result of warming waters in the Arctic, which means the polar, what would you call it? The wind patterns and everything involved with that have been thrown off. So now America and other areas of the world are getting these freezing polar winds and polar climates coming down much further than they have in the past. And so he has indirectly affected that with his own policies, directly affected that when he was in government before. So it's interesting how it can play such a big part in his own inauguration, and maybe he's not even aware of it.
That's true.
Don't you think?
But his inauguration dominated the news cycle for 48 hours. Lots of
still dominating it. Really.
Still dominating it. Lots of executive orders done in very theatrical style in a stadium. With a made-up desk of the White House desk, and an assistant in there. This is what this executive order is, Mr. Trump, and he'd sign it off. And then at the end, he'd throw the Sharpies that he signed them off into the audience as souvenirs.
That's a traditional thing for presidents to do once they sign executive orders. They give the pens to important people as a sign of commemoration.
But he did
do it in a more theatrical way. Yes, that's true. He is particularly theatrical, you could call it, when one of the executive orders, he had to ask, "What is this? I've never seen this before." And they had to whisper in his ear to make him understand, because he has no idea what he's signing. He makes a comment every now and again and then expects it to be put into law.
They are much better prepared than last time they were in power. They had everything lined up of what they wanted to do.
He has a plan to change America forever, and he's not letting up on that.
So lots of things to talk about with the executive orders. The first one was the whole immigration. Talking about an emergency on the southern border, declaring an emergency on the southern border, and readying all the FBI and everyone else to start deporting illegal aliens, particularly those who have committed crimes. The big question is, how far will they go? I was listening to an immigration enforcement person and said they simply don't have the numbers to do huge numbers of people, because this would be like having 3 Hurricane Katrina responses if you wanted to do 3 cities in the US. This is not trivial stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I actually heard an interesting statistic on this, that during the Biden administration, they deported more people than ever before than in the Trump administration previously, simply because they had a more effective staff behind it. And right now they are so backlogged that people are still waiting many years, 10 years, to get their cases heard. And look, no matter how far they go, I don't think they can just kick people out of the country without hearing their case. So it might be a long time before these people ever see the courtroom, and therefore it's going to slow down the whole process.
Let's see, but there was also plane loads of refugees heading towards the US, and they cancelled all those flights.
Really?
So those people are now stranded in those various countries, which is understandable. That's what they want to do. So,
I also find it interesting when it comes to the immigration question. Trump has now latched onto this idea of fentanyl and fentanyl being brought into the country, and let alone which country he's talking about. He uses fentanyl as the reason why he doesn't want immigration from that country. He goes Mexico. Sure, you know that they've historically had a lot of drug issues. So Mexico, yeah. And then he goes Canada. Also, the fentanyl problem. Then he goes Europe, the fentanyl problem. And he starts picking at every single country around the world, claiming that they have some historic problem with fentanyl, which is just based on nothing, right? It's based on no theory or statistics.
I think he even said that about China, that fentanyl problem via China, via Mexico to the US.
Yeah.
So interesting stuff. The other big executive order, or many, was obviously withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord. And the surprising one was withdrawing from the World Health Organization.
I know, that really felt like another step in the direction of all these international organizations just like dismantling and ceasing to exist. Because if you know what is considered the most, or one of the most powerful countries in the world, no longer adheres to the World Health Organization, what is it anymore? I mean, weren't they one of the major components to starting the organization?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the US had such
They're
a part to play.
often one of the bigger funders of these organizations and had a huge influence on the establishment.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, they were responsible for creating the European Union, and it's insane to see how far it's come now that the leader of the US is criticizing the European Union and its roles. It's interesting, it's ironic, the fact that they were the ones who created it. You know, it really shows how he doesn't represent American values, you know, in terms of historical American values. Yeah, that's true. They've changed a lot.
Those values have changed. The other big thing was there's only two genders, according to the US government now, male and female. So that is, again, another huge change. And I think he's fired all the DEI specialists in the government. I think there's something like 100,000 people in the US government focused on equity and inclusion and et cetera, so they've all lost their jobs.
Yeah, well, no, it's historic. I've seen a lot of rebellion to that statement, obviously, because it's a horrific thing to say. And the fact as well, in our society, right, there is a lot of prejudice towards trans peoples. But over the history of humanity, there has been so many civilizations and cultures where there have been additional genders, or where there have been people who identify as something that then became trans now in our current stage. So it's interesting how you can ignore all of that and say that we've always been two genders when there's so much historical proof of that not being the fact.
It's, again, as you know, just a political thing because, well, that's what a lot of people were concerned about in the US because it had been ramped up by the Trump campaign. And so, to give them some credit, they're doing what they said they would do. Okay, a lot of people question whether they do what they said they were going to do. So at least, and that is a measure that people vote for. They expect governments to do that. A lot of people in the US might have been hoping they weren't going to do what they said they were going to do, but so far it seems like they're trying to do what they said they were going to do.
I mean, I think that's one of the critical things about Trump, right? You take him seriously, but you also don't. There's only a certain extent to which you do. And I think a lot of people would hear him say, oh, we're going to make the economy better, we're going to make it easier for you to find jobs because of immigration. Hear that, vote for him, and not hear all the other horrific things that he's going to do, because they just don't believe that a president could do that or would do that.
No, exactly. And so it will be fascinating because a lot of working class people, prescription drug prices are going to be going up because they've got rid of that benefit. And there wasn't a lot. Someone made a comment that there wasn't a lot in these executive orders to help working class people.
Yeah.
Which is rather ironic.
I saw that Bernie Sanders did a whole post essentially laying out everything Trump didn't talk about in the inauguration, but some of it felt a bit too on the nose because there were things that Trump would never be working towards improving. So yeah, the conditions for working class people, the healthcare, introducing a system like Medicare like we have in Australia, etc., etc. But in what situation did he expect that Trump would pull something out of the bag like that?
But long term, that will be interesting, whether if you feel like you're being impacted, what impact that has in 2 years' time or 4 years' time.
That's true.
The other big executive order is birthright. You know, traditionally, if you were born in the US, even if your parents weren't citizens, by automatic decree, you become a citizen. So that's the Birthright Act, and that's in the Constitution, in fact. So it's not just about doing an executive order to change that. So they've done that, and already there is some stays of execution. A Seattle-based judge blocked that, and I think some judges in California have blocked it. So it'll be interesting how that plays out.
I mean, I don't think it's a complete... That's just my sister. I don't think that there's a complete, lack of possibility that they can overrule that. I think these are some temporary blockages these judges are trying to do. But yeah, fundamentally, if it's an object of the Constitution, Americans are very proud of their Constitution and, everything that comes along with it, obviously their free speech, etc., etc. So it'll be interesting to see how they react to that.
It will be. The other big thing is Ukraine. And, Trump had originally said he would solve that war in a day. That's being revised somewhat. But he just spoke to the World Economic Forum in Davos, and he said that he really wants to speak to Putin as soon as possible. And so there's a lot of pressure now coming on Putin to speak to Trump. And there's a lot of talk that unless Russia comes to the table to negotiate, they're going to put more major restrictions on Russia in terms of their oil exports, etc., etc. So it's fascinating how that will play out. And at the same time, Zelensky spoke to the World Economic Forum in Davos again and said it's time for Europe to step up and be independent of the US, so putting pressure on the Europeans to do that, because the interesting thing is who will pay for that peacekeeping force, and hopefully that comes into place. And the fact is, and as I read the other day, a European was saying Putin should not decide who joins NATO and who doesn't. It's not his right to decide whether Ukraine joins NATO.
Yeah,
so it's really interesting, the discussions around this.
It is interesting. I mean, talking about the Davos Economic Forum, that's
World Economic Forum.
Yeah, the World Economic Forum. I also heard a few more remarks given by Trump about the whole Canada situation. He was talking more again about tariffs and about oil and about Canada, if they have anything to say, then they can just join the US. So these remarks that he's making are not slowing down anytime soon. And we know he has a history of not letting up on such things to get to the point where people start to believe it. Why not? Why would Canada not become another state? And he was also talking about the oil prices going down by convincing Saudi and a few other countries to lower their oil prices because he thinks that will solve the Ukraine war.
Right.
Which is bizarre. And I know that he met with the Saudi Arabian prince and they had a very meaningful discussion, and it turned out well, and Trump has heralded him as a great guy and a really good partner of the US, and he's hoping to put $2 trillion or $1 trillion worth into the US. They want to really invest. But that doesn't mean they're going to be lowering their oil prices anytime soon. I can't see a situation in which that would be beneficial for them. Don't you think?
If, a lot of Russia's revenue comes from oil, if their revenue stream dropped in half, in value. That would be very damaging to the Russian
would be
economy,
very
but very,
damaging.
very interesting for world.
But can you ever see a situation in which Saudi would do that?
Not really. No, it seems pretty bizarre. But you never say never in this scenario.
I guess, yeah,
in this
that's
world
true.
we live in.
That's true.
So that's fascinating, Ukraine. And then the other interesting thing, I think, having worked in tech all my career, is the fact that all the tech bros, the Bezos, the Musk, the Zuckerberg, and Sundar Pichai, the head of Google, are all in prominent positions at the inauguration.
And the CEO of TikTok.
And the CEO of TikTok, of course. Let me not forget him.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting. They're out of the shadows and very much in the limelight there, Musk more than anyone. And I hear they're all buying houses in Washington and stuff because they're going to be spending a lot more time because everyone realizes the center of power has moved and they want to play in it.
I mean, this is what you've been saying for a long time, right? You've been saying, well, the world is run by these tech companies and they are the true powers and they, have a higher GDP than most countries in the world. And I've always heard that and thought how interesting, but how incredible that they take a back seat and they respect their position and they respect the position they play in American society, la la la. Obviously, some of them are sick of that and aren't taking it any longer. But you can see exactly how it's happened. I was looking at this thing from the 90s where someone said that America was heading towards this exact situation purely because of the policies they had in place. And, it's late stage capitalism at its finest. So I think that that's going to be majorly influential. When you saw the inauguration and on the what's it called? The place where they all sit.
Oh, the dais?
On the days, I guess, yeah, where they're all sitting there behind Trump and supporting him in that. It's really a terrifying picture, I would say, of what the world has become. So that's
fascinating
thing.
To see how that all plays out. And Elon's already had his first disagreement with one of the policies of the White House. You might have read about the AI Stargate project, which is a joint venture between OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank. 500 million invested in data centers to support AI. And Elon came out and said they don't have the money and he thinks it's a stupid idea.
Right after Trump had, made several statements on the fact that it was a great thing for the American economy and this is the only way to be going forward, called it a wonderful idea. So that's really a massive contradiction in what they're thinking there, and so it raises more questions about how long will they continue to work together in the White House, and what checks could they even put on Elon to keep him out of the political sphere now that Trump has allowed him to enter.
True. It's fascinating. It's a really fascinating question, Freddie.
How can they hold him back? Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm sure there'll be lots to speak about in terms of the US going forward.
Oh, I have one more thing actually to mention. Because we were talking about the inauguration, I want to talk about Melania as well. And it's quite interesting because in the grand tradition of the First Lady of the United States of America, they have worn outfits that are meant to metaphorically represent their position and what the government is going to be doing over the next 4 years. And Melania famously now wore this ridiculous outfit with this hat that obscured most of her vision. I mean, it was rather fabulous, yes, and interesting.
US designer.
Interestingly enough, it was a US designer, and in the past government, she only used European designers. So maybe it's showing a greater respect to, domestic production and independence of America. But I think I was thinking about what could this outfit have to say about her position and the power that she has. And the fact that her vision was so obscured by the hat, it almost reminded me of the Taliban. I know you're going to react a lot to this, but stick with me for a second. For a second. Obviously, women's rights are being denied a lot in the US at the moment. A lot of anti-abortion protesters have now been pardoned when they were about to be put into jail. And, abortion rights over the country are being tested at every stage, and women are now in really horrifying situations. And Trump with his whole there are only two genders, all of this is heading towards a rather Handmaid's Tale type conclusion. And so the symbolism of her wearing a hat where you can't see her eyes at the inauguration of now the most powerful man in the world, I think really has a lot to say that she is not the player here. She is the doll almost beside Trump, and she will not have the power to say things or make a difference.
Okay.
I think so.
Interesting theory. Who do you think chose the hat then? There's some other force chose the hat.
Well, I don't know. I think it'd be rather fabulous if someone made that choice to make a greater impact. No, they think about everything. They don't leave one thing to chance.
Okay.
And the fact that it's become such a hilarious thing on the internet, and almost every day I see something commenting on her outfit, really says something about the impact that that's had.
Interesting. We will see. I'm not sure, but we will see.
Yeah, for sure.
One other thing I wanted to mention about the inauguration was the church service the next day. Bishop Bood also, challenged Trump and Vance to say, have mercy on some of the people that you're dealing with, the immigrants, the trans, the gay individuals. And Trump was not pleased with that, but that was quite a brave thing for her to do.
Yeah, incredibly brave.
So it'll be interesting to see how long she lasts and what goes on there.
I know, because it's really interesting now at this stage. There's a lot of people out there saying, don't give up on all your morals just because he's been put into office. Still stand up against him, do everything you can. This is your chance, really, to really stand up for people. And I guess she heard that dialogue and she realised that she had something to say.
Exactly. And so now turning closer to home, it's almost Australia Day, and there's a lot of discussion still about changing the date.
Yeah, maybe less discussion than there has been in the past, but a lot of people still think it's an incredibly important issue. So, I have a lot to say. We've seen in the statistics that there are less Australians now who believe we should change the date than there have been, but that's a very small percentage. So I think the statistics were something like in 2018 there was 2% more people than in 2% less people who wanted to change the date than in 2023. And now that we're back in 2020, now we're in 2025, it's decreased again. So it hasn't changed monumentally, but it's changed partially. It's not growing as you would expect it to grow, because obviously the massive change in ideology that's happening in Australia and in the world at the moment probably has some effect.
Well, I think also the voice referendum, the major defeat of that means that people aren't as interested in these topics as they were before. So I assume it's going to continue to decrease any percentage of people who want to change this date for coming years. Maybe in the future it might change.
Continue to decrease.
I bet it will.
I don't know about that. But no, we need to keep.
Well, let's see what happens with that. I absolutely think it will, because I actually think the Labor Party's in trouble, and I think the coalition is looking increasingly like they might even form a government in the next election. And I think that's consistent with people not being interested in these change of dates.
Definitely, but coming back to the changing date part, what do you think about it?
What do I think personally?
Yeah, what do you think personally?
It's not the most important thing on my mind. I think long term it would be nice to change the date to a less controversial date so that everyone can feel good about it. But then the question is, what is that date?
There's actually lots of proposals for that date. And regardless, it could be anything other than the date that's celebrating, the end of large populations of the Aboriginal people. I just don't think it's simply that large a deal. It's another one of those things that's been taken by both parties and pushed to the extreme in terms of whether you agree with it or whether you don't. And everyone seems to have a position, right? But it only became a national public holiday in the 40s. So it hasn't even, it's been around for less than 100 years. officially. A lot of people don't celebrate it to this day. You know, they do things with their family, but they don't necessarily celebrate Australia itself. And it's just causing a lot more harm than good. Why do we want to continue celebrating something which isn't how Australia is anymore? When so many people in our community agree with that, it just feels like the opposition comes from a really racist, like a xenophobic point of view.
It does, but it's part of the work. I mean, people would regard it as part of the woke agenda to change the date of Australia Day, right? And for the next few years, that woke agenda is out the door. It's not going to happen. So, you know, I don't think it's really going to be a big topic of conversation for a few years.
I also don't think that we can't just say that because the world is shifting in a very uncomfortable direction towards the right, I don't think we can give up on all our progressive policies. I don't think we can just say, oh, well, it's not going to get through, so we simply should give up on them.
Agreed, but what I would contend is there's bigger issues to deal with at the moment than this, like climate change, etc., etc. And if the government was to support fully a change of date of this, they would be thrown out of office more easily than they will be otherwise. That's the challenge.
I do agree with that, yeah. But it'll be interesting to see if they get elected again.
It will be.
What's happened.
We'll have lots more to say on that and talk about that in our next podcast. Hope you've enjoyed this, our first video podcast, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Bye.